Is sales really the most important skill anymore?
Forgive me, but like this is the unfortunate reality of SDRs today is like they're just going out and spamming a bunch of people.
I just wonder if people and organizations are going to be smart enough to realize it.
Is it too early right now to start like over glorifying the ChatGPT aspect and automation? I think so a little bit.
I have thought a lot about how to make a video on the topic of how tech sales is changing in 2024, and I thought it'd be a great premise for the first ever episode of the Higher Levels podcast. For those of you that have followed the channel Tech Sales with Eric now, we've been live for just over 2 years. We've made tons of content on tech sales and will continue to do so. But now our platform, higherlevels.com, in its first full year of business, is doing multiple six figures of revenue. And we want to speak to both the person in tech sales trying to improve their game, but also the person that has entrepreneurial aspirations, maybe a technical founder that has never had to learn how to market and sell anything. We're going to continue to touch on both topics, both as people still employed at large public tech companies and also as business owners ourselves that have built something from truly the ground up. Today's conversation is a great one. Again, we're going to dive really deep into how it impacts breaking into tech sales, W-2 employees that are SDRs, account executives, but also again, having built a business from scratch here on YouTube and our website, higherlevels.com, we're going to speak to maybe a business owner that has never had to market and sell something at true scale. A lot of the tools that we're seeing and a lot of the trends are going to impact W-2 sellers in a very different way than business owners. And to be honest with you, I don't even think we have an idea 5 years from now of what some of the most popular and prominent tools are going to be. But nonetheless, this is a great conversation with my co-founder, Chris. I hope you get a lot out of it. Also, I'd love your comments below. If this is something you value from, we're definitely going to continue to be making more of these long-form podcast conversations. So if there's any topics you want us to dive into, if you have any feedback on our conversation today, let us know. And there's timestamps in the description if you want to jump around as well. But appreciate your time, and we'll see you in the next episode.
All right, everybody. Higher Levels podcast episode 1, man. Here we are. First 3-camera setup, diving in. And I know I want to riff on this idea. I know we've been talking about it a lot. And just for context for everyone listening, right? Chris and I are still both front lines in tech sales day to day. For those of you that don't know, Chris has built out everything on higherlevels.com. Amazing background in marketing, has exited a couple of businesses. Something we'll get into throughout, I'm sure, the lifetime of this channel, but you'll be seeing him more and more in 24. We have been talking a lot about, especially with AI, all the buzzwords, but also our own experience now owning a 6-figure platform online. Is sales really the most important skill anymore? And again, just restating for everyone listening, like this is from the perspective of enterprise sellers in tech sales on a day-to-day basis. Our W-2 income and our livelihood depends on selling. And I know me being kind of a sales first person, I started to see the light of how important marketing is. Obviously with what we're doing, the channel is growing rapidly, but as we've obviously built out the back end this last year in particular, conversion rates going up, seeing how much of a difference small details truly do make in the life cycle of a customer. Man, I'm gonna dive in today, tons of questions, but maybe opening it up to you, right? Like from what you've seen, you have a unique perspective of what in the late 2010s, 2017, 18-ish, really getting into that marketing side. You ran your own affiliate marketing business. Now you've also been on the front lines in tech sales, calling, emailing, closing deals, all these different things. I'll leave it open-ended. Maybe set the stage for everyone of where your perspective is at, and we'll start to pick it apart.
Yeah, man, it's been interesting. Like I will say a lot has happened ever since I started in tech sales and making that transition. It's probably been like the most profound change in not just sales but also marketing, because like the two are very closely intertwined, especially at the level that we're selling at. I think at a small startup you're not really as tapped into sales in the same way as you are, and so you have to rely a lot more on marketing to figure out where you're at from a product market fit. Now I think the venture capital model where you take on a bunch of money and now you have to like start a sales team and you have to grow it up, that forces you into a different position. But like, I think to answer your question, with the introduction of like AI, automation, like all these buzzwords that are now popping up, it's been interesting, man. Like we were just talking about this too. Like I literally just got a cold call from an AI like Friday. And at first I was kind of like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like this is interesting. But then a minute into the conversation, I knew I was talking to a robot and I just kind of like lost interest, right? So I think it has its use cases, certain places, and can it do things to really help out? Absolutely. But does it replace the fundamental role? I don't know. right? Especially not like at the enterprise level and above that. I think it's a whole different like ball game. Like imagine trying to bring in an AI onto like a sales call with like 4 or 5 different shareholders. It just wouldn't work out, right? So like I think maybe I'm jumping the gun there saying that this is going to be something that can replace sellers and do different things. I think you brought up an interesting point before this too, which is kind of like using it in sync with what you're doing versus completely replacing somebody. Now, does that mean that it's not going to like take people out of jobs? I think it will, but I still think that there's going to be people left, and it's the people who can harness these different tools who will ultimately end up being on top, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think that honestly, it's like the AI in my mind that wins, at least in the next 5 years, is the one that better organizes data, better gives me the lead that is very hot, and I can approach very custom, very tailored as well. But I also think there's a couple of different axes, like for anyone listening that's trying to break in as an SDR. I think the SDR position will fundamentally be here for a very long time. I think you're going to see the skill set required go up in the sense that they want you to think analytically, be able to run reports and all this stuff that in the past they've said would be good. Now I think is going to be more like mandatory. But I think there's a level of this too, to your point on market segment. So if I'm selling to an SMB, probably a lot of repeatable patterns, things I can do. But also if I am looking more at like the stage of a company, organic distribution, like I think in the past in the 2010s, having been an engineer, a lot of people get excited, when they find a new hot tool and it spreads word of mouth across developers and you get these online communities that help. But now the ease of distribution on YouTube, on social, on all these different things, so many factors. Anyway, trying to reel it in here for you. But like, yeah, I guess, how do you, like, for instance, 5 years from now, what do you think are the most tangible impacts to W2 tech salespeople? Is it less jobs, different responsibilities? Like, how do you think it plays out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it'll ultimately depend on where you're at as a seller. Like if you're looking to get into sales because you want to be an entrepreneur, I think you'll definitely learn some skill sets there. But I think people assume that they learn this skill set now and they can just go out and start a business with it, which is, I think, fundamentally very, very flawed. Like the reality of things is you're not going to have like a fully built out motion to go out and sell. Like, especially if you don't have a product, if you don't have like something that we focus on as case studies, right? Like that works really well at the smaller scale because you can validate whether or not your product is working. You can show it to the world, all those different things. Now, the venture capital model is just kind of like, you take on a ton of money and now you're in debt and you got to show investors and, people out there that like you're actually doing things to like make up for it. Yeah. And you're kind of just like figuring it out as you go along, but you don't have that luxury if you're coming in, bootstrapping a company from scratch. Like you kind of just have to be very, very diligent. I mean, same way with us, like we're reinvesting everything into the business. We're very fortunate we haven't taken on any outside investors. I think that gives us like the freedom to kind of figure things out in a way where we don't have to report to investors and show that like, hey, we have all these sellers. I think that puts this unnatural focus on people. But to answer your question, like I think it really just depends on what you're trying to do. Are you just trying to make as much money and you're just trying to get into a career where like, yes, you can W2 like 400K or 500K, because that's great, right? I don't think everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. I think a lot of people go into tech sales because it is one of the highest paying, jobs in the world right now. I don't know where that's going to be 5 years from now, but I think like, yes, you'll need to like figure out how do you now leverage all these tools, automation, AI. Like, I don't know what it's going to look 5 years from now, but I think to your point, you will have to like broaden your skill set. You will have to have a fundamental understanding of like, how do you use these skills in the workflow? Because if you're not using them, there's probably like 200 other people out there that are using them that are going through the application process 5 years from now. So yeah, very long-winded answer, but
no, it's interesting because it's like, I'll be honest, like starting the YouTube and obviously now us connecting, building this platform, like I'm amazed at the enterprise software level that you don't see more startups, to be honest with you, investing in online presences. I think you're seeing the very, very beginnings of this. There's a few companies in particular that I've seen that have an online community like we do that are educating people for free on their open source product. But then from there, it still blows my mind that people think like long term, someone's going to sign up for a webinar and voluntarily give their information. Like in my mind, I think you're going to see from the marketing side, being a dumb salesperson, like I think 5 years from now, a smart company, a very hot startup company, is going to make high quality webinar level content that is so good that they can have a call to action to then have people in the description say, yes, I'm interested. Yes, I want a demo, or yes, I want to see pricing or something. Maybe I'm naive, but like, I think a company that has nothing to lose, to your point, that's not going after this venture model, that's like, hey, you got $10 million, $2 million of that is to build out a sales development function. I do think that's going to go away quite a bit. You're still going to have one SDR, whereas previously you would have hired 6, and all of those things. But yeah, I don't know if that contributes to the conversation, but
no, I think it does.
Yeah.
I think too, like, I think the big thing that is going to happen maybe over the next couple of years is, you make a good point. The issue with it now is that it takes so much time to build out, right? And again, like, we're kind of like in this race against time when we take on a bunch of money. And most of the time, like, as a seller, you're going to be working for companies that take on money. Like, that's just a reality. Especially if you're coming in at like the ground floor, they're probably taking on like 1 or 2 rounds. It's very rare you're going to find a company that has the stability and like the growth that you're looking for, where you can come in at that level and be a seller. So I think like the problem with it is it takes so long to build up that presence. I mean, just think about it. Like, you were building out the channel here for a very long time before I even joined in, right? Yeah. And I'm still working on the back end. We haven't really like made that push and that change over yet. But I think like it takes a long time, and companies aren't willing to like sit down, like, especially if you have investors on the back end that are like, you know, imagine telling them, hey, I'm going to build out this YouTube channel here over the next like 3-4 years. They're going to be like, hey, in all honesty, like, you know,
good luck.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and pack up our bags, right? Yeah. But is it the right way to go about it? Absolutely, because you're building up a brand, right? Yeah. You're not just building up an army of soldiers that are like, you know, forgive me, but like, this is the unfortunate reality of SDRs today, is like, they're just going out and spamming a bunch of people, throwing out like a very wide net. That's not to say that there aren't good SDRs. There's really, really good and talented SDRs that are doing highly strategic level outreach and actually like getting real results. I think those people are going to crush it, and they're the reason why SDRs aren't going to like go extinct, you know, forever. I think that will be the portion of the pie where they'll probably take up 10 people's jobs, right? There'll be much fewer SDRs, but they'll be much, much more impactful. And it's not going to be this motion. I mean, we haven't even talked about this. This is a whole other conversation, but like with, you know, Gmail and Google rolling out these spam filters and different things, you can't just like send out 10,000 webinar invites to your entire list or your Salesforce list and just like, yeah, you're going to get like 0.2% people back. Like, half of those are going to, you know, tell you to go fuck yourself, and the other people are going to be like, yeah, maybe like 3 months from now. Yep. And then you got to like filter it out. So yeah, that's how I think about it. But you know, I'm curious too, like from your perspective, like seeing everything from both sides, like how do you see things evolving from here on out?
Yeah, I think that's like a very real example too that I think is worth like restating. You know, it's like right now you have marketing teams that are blasting out there basically your entire list of like, check out this new product release, or check out this case study with, I don't know, JP Morgan or whatever, right? And like, you fundamentally can't do that. Like, Google and Yahoo are limiting organizations now to 5,000 outbound emails per day. We will see how that shakes out and what that actually means. But yeah, that, like, to your question of what do I see, I don't know how it exactly plays out, but it's like building a better mousetrap in the sense that like, how do you get in great inbound traffic? And I think when I'm thinking about like a tech company, or even what we've done here now, right? You know, it's like one of the things that I saw when I first started this, I didn't even know we were going to build what we have now, but I was like, oh my gosh, tech sales as a search term is blowing up. And there's really not that many businesses or individuals making even videos with tech sales in the title. And like, to be honest, like, little secret for everyone that's watched the channel, like every single one of our videos has like tech sales or SDR or a very high searched and high growing term in the title. And so I think even, you know, I don't know if it's all video format. I don't know if it's like a company giving free tutorials if they're like a very software heavy company, but that's how I think about it. And it's not that hasn't existed, but I think people are trying to like SEO rank against their competitors on Google, when in reality, I know we're kind of talking our niche of developers here, but in my mind, if there's like a new release of Kubernetes, that the startup that gets this right is the one that's going to say like, hey, how to take advantage of this Kubernetes update. And they're giving free value. Yeah. They're talking about, here's how you could do it on your own. Here's how you could do it with our tool. By the way, if you're interested, in the description, like, meet us, you know, or have a talk to our team, whatever it might be, right? So, and again, tying this back to the premise of the episode, and I know I'm getting super deep here, so I hope people are even listening at this point. But it's like, I think that the SDRs, there's going to be a value and a premium on, as there always has been, in terms of reacting quickly. But I think you're going to be able to accomplish more with less SDRs, but they're going to be very smart SDRs. They're going to be people responding within an hour to an inbound request. They're going to be people that can scan through data and connect the dots. But also, I think that's where there's opportunity from a sales technology standpoint, is someone who can go in the database. If we could correlate across their entire history on the internet, like use cookies to see what blogs they saw, what YouTube videos they saw, give me a dashboard of the kinds of things they're already searching. And I know these tools like Demand-Based, Zoom Info are kind of out there with intent and all of these different things. But I think the first person to really connect the dots and help you build a better mousetrap with organic content, that's what I see, I think, 5 to 10 years from now. You're not going to have an entire marketing team. You're going to have like a developer advocate who knows how to do YouTube, and then a few people on the back end putting in the infrastructure. You're going to have less SDRs that are highly, highly tied into real-time leads and making sure they action them appropriately. But anyway, I don't know. That's my thoughts. Hopefully that answers your question. But,
No, 100%.
yeah. And I know, that's kind of like a worst case scenario. In my mind too, there's still going to be a need, like the strategic customers that I'm working with at this point, there's no way that you're going to compete without having salespeople. I mean, there's no chance that sales is ever going away. And like, if nothing else, it's going to be because these mega funded companies are willing to send 3 bodies on site to the biggest customers in the world. And like, if you don't have that and you think you can just sell from Zoom or you can get them to like self-serve, that's insane. So there's definitely a lot of sales that is not going away. And I still think it's a great career path to get into. So maybe I'd be curious from your vantage point, what of the existing sales infrastructure today will exist in 5 to 10 years time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you kind of know my stance on it a lot, in the sense that like, I think, we started out with a very broad motion of like enterprise and strategic, and I think it works really well there because like you can't put an AI there. You can't just rely on, like a pricing page to close a $100,000 deal or $1 million deal. Like, it's just not going to happen. There's so many additional layers to that. But I think at the SMB velocity commercial level, I think there is a little bit of overuse right now of resources where like they're still trying to figure out like where does tech sales fit into this whole thing, right? And I think the problem is also that marketing and sales aren't really working together most efficiently. Like, you take on the money. I don't want to keep going back to this, but it's interesting because this is how this whole model plays out. It's like you take on the money and then you're hiring marketing people that don't really understand your product. They're creating marketing content that doesn't really align with like how salespeople see it, how they sell. Yeah. And so it's like this very disjointed function all of a sudden where you're relying on that initial product market fit that you had before you went out and hired those people. You're scaling, manually because you already have that positioning in the marketplace. But like in terms of like where it's going, I could see maybe, teams maybe cutting down on those segments a little bit more. I think that enterprise sellers, especially throughout this downturn, I think it's become very evident like who's actually good at selling and who isn't. Yeah. Like 2 years ago, and I wasn't even really like deep in the weeds at this point, but I think like from my own experience talking to people and also like being in business myself, like it was a whole different market. Yeah. You could basically like you were more an order taker than you were a seller, right? Obviously depending on where you're at, like from an organizational standpoint, but back then you just had to show up to a call and then marketing and all the money flowing around the VC role was just kind of like doing the work for you. Now I think it's much harder. There's a bigger emphasis on like this is why we see like security and compliance products just like absolutely popping off during like this downturn, whereas like the nice to haves are really struggling. So I think they'll probably flush out those details a little bit more, but I do see them probably reducing that a little bit or really refining it, right? Like having fewer sellers instead of just like hiring 20 reps and saying, all right, here's your goal, like go figure it out. Oh shoot, like we misadjusted these goals and sorry that nobody could hit their number. So I think that's going to be the big change from my vantage point at least. I think we're probably going to see a reduction of those teams and maybe a bigger effort, which is the way that I think it should be, right? Like I think there should be a bigger emphasis on enterprise strategic, but it's also a good question because like how do you fill up the pipeline for you guys as well, right? Because like if there isn't those lower levels, that's where I think marketing comes in, right? I think like the issue of having those teams in the first place is mostly because your marketing is not in order. if you really like honed in your marketing material, and if you had like a moat or like an organic channel where you just like had a steady inflow of leads, then yeah, it would be a perfect world. Unfortunately, like that's not the reality a lot of times. But yeah, I think it's like an everlasting conversation between marketing and sales. I don't think like there's ever going to be a position where, you know, they're going to be perfectly aligned always.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's basically how I see it playing out.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like takeaways too, I think it's like the enterprise motion is always going to be there. But I think from the life cycle of a business, like you can't go from a 10-person company to one supporting numerous Fortune 100 clients. Like unless you have that infrastructure. So yeah, I think it's like, and I mean, even taking a step out of business to business, like highly technical sales, like with our motion, we were talking just before we started recording, like all of these online education platforms, in terms of the ones that are building a standalone brand. I think in the past you could get away with that. Now it's like almost essential to have your own platform. So unless you're actually coding the platform that hosts the educational material, that hosts the live calls, that hosts the chat, like if you are creating any type of online education business, I just don't think there's any way to build it without an organic channel. And I think tying this back to more B2B, where we are frontline sellers for, I think starting out, yeah, it just ties back to now there's got to be an organic tailwind behind it. And traditionally, again, I think 2010 to 2020, developers talk amongst themselves. They share what tools are their favorite. That will obviously continue. But I think you're really going to bolster yourself. And like if you're truly at zero, making tons of free value tutorials or talking about your experience at Google and the types of things you designed and why you went and created the company that you did is going to be the future of really creating an organic, you know, surface area of sales and marketing in the first place. So
yeah, I think also like from a seller's perspective, like if we had to tie that back in, you know, if you're out there watching, either like you're looking to break in, you're actively selling, like I think the biggest takeaway, at least like from what we're seeing, right? Like from being and marketing ourselves, like having to figure this stuff out on the fly, and also like being sellers, I think the biggest takeaway for you is probably going to be like leverage the tools around you. Like don't get into a position where now you're playing catch up with the rest of the market. Like maybe you're complacent. You know, sales have been working a very certain way over the last 10 years, especially like enterprise sales, tech sales. You know, it used to be this field where there wasn't as much attention around it and it was very lucrative. It was like this golden secret. But I think like those sellers, unless they're willing to adapt, are probably going to go extinct. Yeah. You know, like I see so many sellers today where like they literally can't even figure out like Salesforce reporting. They don't know how to like listen to a gong call, which like blows my mind, right? And these are like strategic level sellers that are like very successful. Like don't get me wrong, they're crushing it, right? And they some of them even like W2 like $1 million+ during like the peak years of their career. But I think there's this big shift happening now, where if you stay in that realm and you don't adapt, and this goes for just about anything, but it's an important inflection point now more than ever, because these tools are popping up at such a rapid rate, and we haven't had like a development like this before in sales, in marketing, and now the two can finally like work together a little bit more. So yeah.
And I think like maybe even putting that in like I'm the person that's trying to break into tech sales, like what do I actually do in the next 30 days? Like I even think about, and I know we've been consistent with this message on our platform. So I know like we feel like everything we built is completely in line with this, just because I think that's what top performing SDRs do anyway. But I think it's like the biggest thing in my mind is even when I got into engineering in 2016, I was doing all my interviews in 14 and 15. I think it's like when I saw those salespeople break in, it was like great attitude. They're not afraid of making cold calls. They're willing to get it done. And like, sure, at the highest level, that still exists. But I think it's like when I think about how I'm positioning my resume or my past experience, it's like, how did I take some type of tool or some type of infrastructure and get an outcome in a different way than most people, or just do something that people weren't willing to do. But even as an example, like as a college student, like if I was a member of a club, how did I get the club a result in an unorthodox way? Did I tap into a list of alumni and, you know, call them to raise funds when no one had done that because they were too lazy the last like 4 to 5 years? When I was in, you know, a class project, did I get an extreme result because I saw something that others didn't? I utilized a tool, or I did something in a different way than most had. Like, I think those are the stories at the top companies in the world that are really going to hold weight and really set you apart as someone trying to break in. But my 2 cents, you know, I don't know. But you know what I mean? I think like for everyone watching, one, if you made it this far, awesome. We got deep here. So, and two, I think maybe a few quick recaps and like closing thoughts. Maybe from your side, if you were to summarize in say 90 seconds or less, here to 5 years. I know we've kind of danced around the subject, but maybe give me the bullets of like the biggest changes.
I mean, I think the biggest change inevitably, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but like you're going to see this stuff popping up a lot more. I think it started out as buzzwords, but you will start to see some of these things stick. Like we've seen tools like Outreach, like SalesLoft get like very, very standardized today. And I think we're going to see a lot more. Like I'm starting to see like cold call, role-playing tools basically being implemented across like huge, like we have at HashiCorp. I know Snowflake is rolling it out. AWS is rolling it out. So like companies are starting to really adopt these things very heavily. So I think you're going to start seeing these tools inevitably. Like takeaway for you as a seller or for somebody looking to break in, is it too early right now to start like over glorifying the ChatGPT aspect and automation? I think so a little bit, but is it important that you can show that you can adopt and adapt to new technology? Yeah, absolutely, right? So I think that's the biggest thing is do not get left behind. Yeah. This is like the most vanilla thing to say ever, but stay curious, like stay on top of these things. Don't take them for granted. Like I have implemented certain things in my workflows where I could not see myself going back, today without them. Yeah. But yeah, just take advantage of the technology and don't get left behind. But anything else you got on that?
No, I think so. Absolutely. Like keep pace with it, but also like you want to be wary of like getting into something that's not going to pan out. But I agree. I think like when I joined tech sales, like Gong and conversational intelligence was that thing that really blew up. Mm-hmm. I think someone's going to get it right. Yeah. And I don't think it's an existing player. Someone foundationally, I think 2 to 3 years from now is going to have a tool that really makes everyone rethink what they're doing. But I also think like niche positions, quasi-marketing, quasi-sales are going to have a lot higher leverage. I just wonder if people and organizations are going to be smart enough to realize it. Because I mean, to be honest, I think a lot of people are playing scared right now and just happy to have a job versus like really asking for what they're worth. So I'm going to be curious on that side. I think like you're going to see a lot more leverage in high skilled positions, as always is the case. But I think even more, you'll see unorthodox like lawyers, med school dropouts, engineers, even trying sales even more, because I think it really is going to become much more systematized, much more data driven, but not in the sense like just a dashboard. Like you're actually going to be able to implement end-to-end workflows that drive results. So yeah, man, that was wide ranging. And I don't know, like, yeah, I would say if anything, like, again, if you're an SDR, I think not to self-promote, but if you've been following like the content that we make, I still think that's everything we've talked about is very, very valuable. Like, I don't think the days of just one more phone call are like really, that's like 2010 to 2015. But yeah, I think just working smarter, leveraging tools, like all of that is going to come into play. So, we'll see where it goes. But
no, 100%.
Well, hey, if you made it this far, this was our first ever episode on the Higher Levels podcast. We're really going to do our most to kind of keep you up to date with current events for sure. There's definitely going to be some more that are tactical deep dives. And again, just for anyone that maybe found us through this podcast first, obviously we have this YouTube presence, but if you're wondering about the business we're talking about, higherlevels.com in the description is what we built over the last year and a half. And it's now a 6-figure platform. And yeah, we're reinvesting everything and trying to make sure we focus on value and keep you up to date with the latest trends. But appreciate it if you made it this far. We'll see you on our next episode. And yeah, until next time.